Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. As you know, already had passed 12 weeks of this Resistencia Dinamica, so thanks for the organizers. And today, it's my pleasure to introduce Jérôme Bouzy from University Paris-Sud. He will speak about a nonlinear thermodynamical formalism. Jérôme, please.
Thank you. So thank you, Ali. Thank you, Lorenzo, for organizing this seminar. Okay, so I will explain joint work with Renaud Leplédeur about a new kind or different kind of thermodynamical formalism. So first, I will. So what I will do is I will recall some simple, let's say, the physical origins of the thermodynamical formalism in really the simplest case. And I will see that, okay, among the things that physicists do, there is something called mean field theory that leads actually to this nonlinear formalism. And so with Renaud, we tried to translate this nonlinear formalism of some mean field theories from physics into dynamics. Okay, that's the motivation. Before that, Renaud with Frédéric Whiteblade studied some important special cases like the Curie-Weiss model. I will mention it later. And with Renaud, we have obtained a more general theory. Okay, and I will present. For this theory, we have some kind of, let's say, basic results, which are more or less the equivalent of the theory of, let's say, as it was developed, for instance, by Peter Walters, okay, using epsilon n separated sets and so on. And we'll see that we have in this nonlinear setting, we have a variational principle, some results of equidistributions, and we can characterize the nonlinear equilibrium states. Okay, and then I will give some ideas of the proofs. So actually the proofs are quite easy, it turns out. So, okay, we will see what we can think about this business at the end. Okay, so in some sense, what is the physical origin of the thermodynamical formalism of Sinai, Ruel, Bowen that we know? It's we can say it comes from statistical mechanics on lattices. So a very simple example is the one-dimensional Ising model, where you just have a sequence of +1 or -1. Okay, you are interested in translation invariance, so you have the dynamics, which is just the translation. And the rule is that so you call, since you are a physicist, you're calling each symbol spin, which can be up or down, +1 or -1. And you want to say that you will have the energy will just be, there is which will just be will just come from interaction with the nearest neighbors. Okay, so here it was, okay, this is sigma. Okay, and so you, as a physicist, you know what energy is, at least if you're looking to a finite subsystem. So one way to define a finite subsystem is to look at the periodic sequences. Okay, and here n is the size, and you want something you repeat. Okay, and so now you can define the energy of the whole thing as the energy for okay, the sum of the energies which come from the interaction of each site with the neighboring site. So I realized that the definition of phi has disappeared somewhere. So let me try to write it. Okay, you want to essentially, you, let me, I think the formula is something like this. Okay, so let's just focus on the first product. You see that if x0 and x minus 1 are equal, then this product is 1, so minus is minus 1. This is a low energy. And if the spins disagree, then the product will be minus 1, and so it will give a contribution plus 1. So there is an energy cost in having two spins, two consecutive spins that disagree. Okay, that's the, okay, and then you say, okay, the energy of a finite piece is just the sum of these energies. Okay, you see that you have a problem in the sense that, okay, you need to say what happens on the boundaries, and you solve this problem by deciding that you're looking only at periodic things. Okay, so now each time you have a finite configuration, it has some energy. Okay, and the physicist will tell you, okay, you have a Gibbs okay, ensemble, which is the probability measure on the set of finite systems of given side, such that the probability of each configuration is proportional to exponential minus the energy divided by the temperature. Okay, so for real physicists, beta is 1 over the temperature. Okay, so this gives you so you need to normalize if you want a probability measure, and so you have this normalizing constant Zn, which is called the partition function. Okay, and the result in this case, one can make explicit computations. There are many ways to analyze this example. It's a classical result in this statistical mechanics thing. So what you get is that when you let the size of the finite configuration go to infinity, these measures are converge to a unique translation invariant measure, mu0, which is characterized by the fact that it minimizes some functional, which physicists call free energy, okay, which is this P of mu, which is the entropy of mu. So this is the Kolmogorov-Sinai entropy minus beta times the average of the energy with respect to mu. So this is the integral of beta phi with respect to mu. Okay, so this result tells you that there is all these things converge, and they converge to the unique maximizer of this quantity, free energy. And moreover, you have a kind of combinatorial formula without the measures to compute the value of this free energy at the limit, at this equilibrium, which is just obtained by extracting the growth rate of these partition functions. Okay, so here, probably if I want to be a serious physicist, I should put a minus sign, and it's n times beta. I think so. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and this was so this kind of okay. These ideas were translated into dynamical systems. Let's say in the 60s and 70s by Sinai and then Ruel and Bowen. And you can, and for instance, in the book by Ruel, Thermodynamical Formalism, you will find this whole theory that was really translated from statistical mechanics, I mean, a special part of statistical mechanics into dynamical systems. And we know how useful it is. And for instance, with the characterization of I mean, good settings of physical measures as equilibrium states. Okay, so that's very well known, but I wanted to recall the origin, because now, okay, as I said, there are lots of things in in statistical mechanics. So one other things that physicists do is to, okay, so sorry, I should go back. So one way that physicists understand this result is that for this type of potential, which such that far away spins do not contribute a lot to, or even do not contribute at all to the energy related to some given spin. So this is called short range. Here we are in one dimension, and you have a more general result than what I write. Okay, that will tell you that there is so since there is a unique maximizer and unique equilibrium state, physicists will tell you there is no phase transition. Okay, a phase transition is, I mean, the most spectacular ones are the one between solid and liquid and so on. So here in this setting, you do not see any such exciting phenomenon. You have uniqueness, okay, and it's related also to smoothness of physical quantities, but I don't want to talk about that. So one of the first attempts to see these phase transitions that exist in nature was by the means of mean field models, and this is one of the simplest one, the Curie-Weiss model, which okay, where instead of saying that each spin interacts with its neighbors, its immediate neighbors, for instance, you said, no, each spin will interact with the average spin. Okay, this is why it's called the mean field. Okay, so you write a little formula, and you can rewrite it as you have the average. So the energy of the finite configuration can be written as the average of actually just the spin, okay, to the square. Okay, maybe I'm forgetting a constant here, but okay, I don't care. Okay, and now you can do the same. Once you have defined the energy, you do the same as before to define these Gibbs ensembles by saying that the probability is proportional to this exponential factor. Okay, so this is you change the definition of the energy in a little bit strange way, but the rest you keep it. And then something happens. This is why this mean field theory was created. You see, you can show that when beta is large, okay, so when the temperature is small, okay, for this example and other examples like this, you have a phase transition, that is, you have non-uniqueness. So you can define the free energy, which now will be defined like this. It's always you have this formula as before in terms of the partition function. Okay, but now you have two equilibrium states, okay, at small temperature, and Gibbs ensembles here they converge to the average. Okay, you could so you can see this phenomenon of phase transition that you know to exist. You can see it in this formalism, which is still quite simple. I mean, simpler than the true Ising model in higher dimension that was studied by Sager, for instance. Okay, so you have this nice physical theory. And what Renaud Leplédeur and Frédéric Watt-Bled did a few years ago was to translate this.
Sorry,
Yes.
Jerome, I have a question. In the theorem for a small beta, you have only one measure as limit. But what happened?
Yeah.
Do you know what happened for the bifurcation parameter when the beta naught when you goes from only one equilibrium to two? What happened with that measure? What is or it is a silly question.
No, it's not a silly question. Okay, I don't want to say. The answer could be silly. That's why I'm hesitating. So what? So once you go beyond, yeah, you have these two measures. One for which you have two. Okay, I'm not completely sure of my answer. What I believe is that you have two equilibrium states also at the critical value. I mean, here you can compute everything. It's not completely obvious, but it's an exercise for physicists. So you have to go, there is a way to compute everything. And what you get, if I remember correctly, is that you have one critical temperature. Okay, above this temperature, there is a unique equilibrium state. Okay, and below this temperature, you have two, and it's below it, and at exactly the critical temperature, I think you also have two equilibrium states. Okay, I'm not 100% sure, but this is what I expect. Okay, so anyway, what I will retain from this is that, okay, what happens is that before we had a linear functional here in this, so we had the entropy minus just the integral of the potential or the energy, as you wish to call it. Now it's nonlinear, the squared appeared. Okay, and it's related to the fact that then you will have these two equilibrium distinct equilibrium states that can appear, and okay. The thing I'm interested in is the fact that you may have several equilibrium states, even though you are still looking at a very nice dynamical system and a potential which depends on, well, now it's a little bit, okay, this potential here is definitely short range, okay, but still you get phase transitions. Okay, so now the question we asked ourselves with Renaud is the following. Can we translate this formalism for the mean field formalism à la Curie-Weiss into something meaningful for dynamical systems? Okay, that's the question we wanted to address. Okay, and this is the way we did it. So now okay, so you start, okay, what will you have? You will have some discrete time dynamics, so continuous map on a compact metric space. You want, okay, the energy now revert to the terminology of dynamicists. I call it the potential, is just a continuous function over this the space. Okay, we will add the nonlinearity, which will just be a continuous function. Okay, in the example above, it is just the functions square. Okay, but we will see how it goes when we take more general functions. Okay, and now we essentially adapt the usual definitions. So for probability, once you have an invariant probability measure, okay, P of X is the set of invariant probability measure. so sorry, P of X is a set of all measures. Then you can define the usual Kolmogorov-Sinai entropy. Okay, sometimes it is convenient to pretend that the entropy of a non-invariant probability measure is minus infinity. So you, okay, just for technical reason, let's say. Okay, the usual pressure, so here we'll call it the linear pressure, just to, because I need to speak both about the classical objects and the new one. So the linear pressure is, okay, the sum of the entropy plus mu plus the integral of phi. Okay, let me just tell you that the reason why it's called pressure and not free energy is not completely clear. Okay, so in some model, if the value at each integer is some kind of number of atoms, then it's, yes, it can be physical pressure. Okay, but we will not go into this. Now I just call it pressure like everybody else, and I don't want to comment more about it. Okay, and the nonlinear pressure is the same, except that you replace the integral of phi by this function f that you choose, for instance, the square of that integral. Okay, so it's a kind of, I don't know, semi-linearity, whatever. Anyway, this is what it is. And now you define equilibrium states as you should. That is, in the classical case, the linear equilibrium state are those that maximizes the pressure. Okay, and same thing for the nonlinear case. Oops. Okay, and now to define the topological pressure.
Excuse me,
yes?
Can I have a question?
Sure.
In the last theorem, the equilibrium states is the linear or the non-linear? There exists at least two.
So in the previous case, it's in mechanical. It's in statistical physics. So okay. It's the okay. Let's say I don't want to be too precise about it. Okay. Here the definition was that it maximizes this nonlinear free energy.
The nonlinear.
So
okay.
Yes, in this setting, in our setting, we would call it nonlinear equilibrium.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And by the way, feel free to ask questions. Okay, so as I was saying, we want to define the topological pressure or the nonlinear topological pressure. It's essentially in the way introduced for the usual formalism by Dinaburg, Bowen, and especially Walters with respect to pressure. So we consider dynamical balls, okay, around some point x. It's as usual the set of points that stay epsilon close for time n. Okay, and once we have this notion of dynamical ball, we can define covers. So a cover of X is a set such that if you take the union of these dynamical balls centered at the points of the set, you cover everything. Once you have your cover, you want to define a weight. Okay, it's not just the, if we wanted to compute the topological entropy in the Bowen and Dinaburg way, we would just count. Here we want to do it, we want to compute the pressure, so a la Peter Walters. So we define this weight. Okay, so sorry. So this is the weight of the classical case, used, for instance, by Peter Walters, introduced by Peter Walters. And now the nonlinear equivalent is we just insert our nonlinearity. Okay, so this function f, okay, we have to decide that it's more reasonable to take the average, I mean, to have this renormalization. Okay, and now that we have this definition, we can define, the topological pressure. So here I have recalled, let's say, Peter Walter's definition of the topological pressure, the classical, so we say the linear topological pressure. And for us, we just make this small modification where we introduce the nonlinearity. So really, it turns out that we do the simplest things. Okay, so that's the objects. Okay, so it's really completely parallel to the classical case. And now we look at what we can say about these things. So the first thing is that for the variational principle, it almost goes like the classical case. So if you take just any continuous system, so it means essentially, like in the slide before, X is a compact metric space, and the rest of the things are continuous. Okay, then we need we need an extra condition. So, for instance, we need that if the ergodic measures are dense in the invariant measure, that's enough. Okay, then we have a variational principle. So this is just the definition of the nonlinear topological pressure, and as it should be, it coincides with the supremum of the nonlinear pressure, of the measures. So that's the nonlinear pressure. Okay, unfortunately, my correction will disappear immediately, but okay, and moreover, in this proof, we get that, as in the classical case, once you completed the limit epsilon goes to 0, okay, the fact that here you had a lim sup or a lim inf does not matter anymore. Okay, any question about this statement? Okay, what I can say is that, okay, I can add is that this, so some extra condition seems to be necessary. I mean, with this definition, it is definitely necessary. So an example. So here is an example of a system for which the condition of density of ergodicity fails, and the topological pressure is actually not a bound for the pressure of the measures. Okay, you just take this is very simple system with 2 fixed points. Okay, at each of these fixed points, the weight will be -1 because of this definition. Okay, and then you have a problem. You can do better just by mixing the two ergodic invariant measures in some stupid way. Okay, so here you need something. So
excuse me, Jérôme, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So do you assume anything about f?
So for now, f is continuous.
Just continuous function.
For
so
now,
you don't
just continuous.
Assume that f of 1 is equal to 1 to guarantee that then you take constant function or zero function, then you get entropy, topological entropy. You don't assume anything.
No, so I'm not.
Thanks.
So of course, if f is constant, then the nonlinear pressure will just be the entropy plus that constant.
Mm-hmm.
But no, we don't at this. So for these first two theorems, we don't need more than continuity and this extra thing, which of course is not necessary. Okay, but you cannot just remove it. I make a further comment when I tell you a little bit about the proof. Okay, so the second result is about, let's say, this equidistribution. So this is again, essentially, it is again parallel to the linear case. So you take a cover with minimum weight. you put, now you push it for a time n to get something which is almost invariant. Okay, it's this formula. And now you put weights defined by the value of phi. Okay, S and phi is the ergodic sum. Probably it's obvious. Okay, so S and phi is the ergodic sum. Okay, this would be at x. But, okay. Okay, so it's really the same thing as the classical one, except always for this insertion of f. Okay, so once you do this, okay, so now I'm going to add an assumption, a strong assumption, which is expansivity. Okay, essentially because I want, okay, let me state the result and then I will make a comment. So expansivity is the usual two-sided expansivity. If two orbits are closed, epsilon closed for all times in past and future, then in fact they are the same orbit, the same point. Okay, so under this assumption, then first, okay, what is known is that then it's enough to consider epsilon n balls to compute the entropy. You don't need the limit as epsilon goes to 0. Okay, and a stronger form of this is that the limit of these Gibbs ensembles for this fixed epsilon, any epsilon which is an expansivity constant in this sense, these measures will converge weakly to averages of equilibrium states. Okay, and you see that if xt is not even expansive, then, okay, so first, if there is no assumption at all beyond the continuity, there might be no equilibrium states, even in the classical case. Yes?
There's a question from, I think, Lorenzo, yes. Do you assume that T is a homeomorphism?
Yes, when I write it, sorry, F is equal to T. And they are both homeomorphism.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't think it's very important, but I haven't really thought about it. So maybe, but okay, if it's not a homeomorphism, you should use positive expansiveness. Okay, I think it says that the same result, the analogous result remains true if it's one-sided. If it's not invertible, but I haven't thought about it. Okay, so you have this. So again, please feel free to ask questions. I'm not looking at the chat because this would, I don't have that large bandwidth. So, but feel free to interrupt. Okay, so so here you see I said average. It's really a necessary restriction. For instance, in the Curie-Weiss model, you can choose a Gibbs ensemble. Actually, the natural choice for Gibbs ensemble will be symmetric under a change of sign of each spin. Okay, but the two equilibrium states, at least when beta is large at small temperature, do not satisfy this symmetry. I mean, this is exactly the part of the phase transition in this model, that you will have one measure where most of the spins are +1 and another measure where most of the spins are -1. Okay, and so this shows this dissymmetry of the equilibrium states, of the individual equilibrium states, show you that certainly if you cannot hope these ensembles to converge to an equilibrium state just by itself. And in the Curie-Weiss model, you already see that it's not true like in the linear case. I mean that in contrast to the linear case, linear combination, convex combination of equilibrium states are not necessarily equilibrium states. Okay, so this, okay, so here we really need this average. Okay, but it stays essentially the same as in the classical theory. Okay, now we can, we want to analyze the equilibrium states to characterize them. So we will need this time a strong hypothesis. Okay, in some sense, it's like in the classical theory. If you just want this variational principle and equidistribution, you can deal with arbitrary topological dynamical systems. If you want to have something like uniqueness under topological transitivity or any kind of reasonable irreducibility assumption, then you need essentially to have some kind of more or less uniform hyperbolicity, or so, let's say some kind of hyperbolicity. Okay, so here my assumptions are essentially saying that the underlying system, okay, my assumption, so now I call this assumption strongly regular, because for some reason I prefer to state them abstractly, but you may think about them as just the things that are true for uniformly hyperbolic dynamics, like an SFT with a Holder continuous potential phi. Okay, so what the properties that are true in this setting and that we need are the following. So first, the entropy function on the set of invariant probability measure is upper semi-continuous. Now, second, you want that for each, so now we are not going to consider just phi, but any multiple of phi. So for any real beta, we look at beta phi. And we want that for this potential beta phi, there is a unique equilibrium state. A classic linear equilibrium state. This is and finally, we want that the pressure function little p, which is defined over R, and to which real number beta associates the topological pressure of beta phi, we want this function to be strictly convex and real analytic. Okay, this will be true in the classical case, by which I mean SFT or let's say transitive SFT or transitive basic piece of a uniformly hyperbolic dynamics. Okay, we will have this thing. And now the theorem that we have with Renault is the following. Okay, so assume that assume these properties, so strong, which we call strong regularity. Now take some nonlinearity. If this nonlinearity is not only continuous but real analytic, then there are finitely many nonlinear equilibrium states. Moreover, we know what they are. Okay, actually the nonlinear equilibrium states are for phi are linear equilibrium states for beta phi for some finitely many values of beta that we can compute in principle. Okay, so the uniqueness that we had in the linear case is lost in some case. It's not always true. In some sense, that's not a bug, that's a feature. I mean, really, this whole business. So, okay, I should say it includes the Curie-Weiss model. So, of course, in this model, we already know that there is no uniqueness. So okay, the uniqueness, this is the way it is. Okay, but we show finiteness in general. And since the nonlinear equilibrium states are actually linear equilibrium states for other potentials, I mean, multiple of the potential you are looking at, they have the usual properties. So for instance, they are ergodic. And I don't know if the underlying system was mixing and with these good properties, then it would be Bernoulli and have exponential decay correlation and whatever. They are the same measures, except for not for the same potential.
So the number of nonlinear equilibrium states can be bounded by the number of critical points of F or something like this? No, you don't have an upper bound for the number.
Well, we have, in some sense, we have something better. When we will do the analysis, you will see that you actually have, you can compute. As I'm saying, this nonlinear equilibrium state will be n beta for beta that belongs to some set. Okay, and this set will be, if you are able to compute this function p, okay, which is the case for simple, at least for simple SFT and for potential that depends only on finitely many coordinates. This is something that you can do in principle, and in the simplest case, I can do it too. So it's in some sense very explicit. Okay, let me.
Yes. Sorry, Jerome, I have another question. In the theorem, you have that these equilibrium states are the equilibrium states of some multiple of the potential. There is some meaning for that multiple, or?
Sorry, there is a.
You have that is the equilibrium state for some, say, alpha times the potential. You have some meaning for this alpha, or?
Well, we will characterize this, these values, yes. So I don't have a general ID that I can give you to say, oh, this is, but this will be, I will write an equation and the solution will essentially be those betas, those numbers.
But this equation have some meaning, or is just?
I don't know.
Let's see the equation. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So you see, I don't know in general what meaning exactly you can give to these numbers. Okay, so first maybe, okay, I should stop at what time? Just to optimize.
Minutes, indeed. Lorenzo?
Ali, you
are the chairman, but I think that he has at least 15 minutes.
Yeah,
that is.
Yeah, 15, yes.
Okay, so at 5 past 5.
You start a little late. I think this.
Yeah, okay, no problem. It's just because, okay.
Take your time.
So oh, this is a dangerous proposition. Okay, so first I want to tell you about the proof of the first two theorems, which are in some sense very close to the classical result, with just a little bit of just a few differences. So the first thing you can prove is this bound. Okay, you want to prove that the nonlinear topological pressure, even with a inf, is an upper bound for the pressure of measures. Okay, so this is actually a direct computation. You take so here you see it's an ergodic. It's enough to get to use ergodic measures. So you take an ergodic measure, and you can do computation. Essentially, an ergodic measure will give you plenty of points, which have the right average for the potential, and which are in number, in big number given by the entropy of that measure. And when you put this into, when you do your computation, you get that you can, these numbers will provide you a lower bound for the topological pressure. Okay, so there is no special difficulties. Okay, now there is a step which is even easier, but where something happens in fact, which is to go from the ergodic to non-necessarily ergodic. And this is where we need the extra assumption. Okay, so this extra assumption can be the one I gave, which was density of the ergodic measure, weak density of the ergodic measure. Okay, you could make things a little bit weaker, the assumption a little bit weaker by saying you just want that given any measure, not necessarily ergodic, you can find an ergodic measure which has almost the same entropy and almost the same value of the potential. Okay, so I don't know if this is really better to weaken this condition and what is the boundary, but you could also go into a completely different direction. If you assume, if for some reason the nonlinearity you like is convex, then this is also automatic. Okay, so this step is completely trivial, but something happens in the sense that because you're in the nonlinear case, you need a little bit of something to go from ergodic measures to non-ergodic measures. But this is all there is, but there is something.
Oh, Sharon, just another
Yes?
question. What you just mentioned is that you assume not only that the measures are dense, but also entropy dense, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a bit strong.
Oh. You're right, maybe.
But you have semi-continuity, isn't it?
Well,
Yes, I assume. No, no. Let me check. I
don't remember the.
Oh, you're right. No, you're right. You're right. Okay, I don't know. I looked at this 10 times, but still, okay, you're right. We need, okay. The density here, so this is a correction to the statement of the theorem about the variational principle that I gave before, sorry. I need this density in both, okay, so I need this property here. Something, okay, let's say like this. Okay, I can approximate an arbitrary invariant measure by an ergodic one. Okay, such that, and the approximation is, and you're right, at this point, I need to do it explicitly. I need both the entropy and the, sorry, and the value of the integral to be close. Okay, because these are the two numbers that appear in my formula. Okay, this is what's written in the paper, and I don't know why I forgot about it. Okay, so you want to yeah. So thank you, Catherine. This is correct. So the density is in this sense. Sorry, it's not weak density. It's not the density with respect to weak star. It's not enough. I mean, it's different. Okay, so thank you for correcting this. Okay, so anyway, so here we need something to, what I wanted to point out is that we need something to go from the ergodic case to the non-ergodic case because it's nonlinear. Okay, and this something can be of different nature, so it's unclear what is the best, or if there is a best assumption. I mean, as I said, you can have this kind of density assumption, or you can have something that for me is completely different. If the nonlinearity is convex, then you don't need, you can just go, you apply the convexity and that's all, you don't need the density. Okay, and finally, to complete the proof of the variational principle, you use the Mizuevich argument. That is from the definition of the topological pressure, nonlinear topological pressure, you find an epsilon n cover which has, which is responsible for this value of the topological pressure. You split this cover according to the average of your potential, okay, and then you use these subcovers to build a measure, an invariant in the limit, an invariant measure that will have the right average of the potential and the right entropy. And the way you do it is exactly a Mizoevich proof of the usual variational principle. Okay, just you have to split your covers because you have to deal with this value of alpha, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so, okay, this is what I already said. Okay, one thing that I don't know is, okay, if I want to control the pressure of all measures, then certainly I need this extra assumption. This was the point of the example. Okay, but maybe we are not looking at the right thing, and maybe we should restrict ourselves to ergodic measure. And this, we don't know if it works. I mean, here you see that this part, this inequality works easy. I mean, it's easy for ergodic measures. The reverse inequality, because of this argument, we get this measure mu by taking some limit, and we have no idea. Okay, certainly doesn't have to be ergodic. And what can we do as soon as f is not linear? I don't know what to do with the ergodic decomposition of mu to have a lower bound here. So I don't know that so this question is equivalent to the question, can I restrict here the supremum to ergodic? Okay, this I don't know. Maybe we don't know. Okay, so that's the, essentially well, you just have to do correctly the usual way, okay, and it works without really new. Okay, so now I want to prove the other theorem. So the last theorem, when you assume a strong regularity, like in the Holder continuous potential for uniformly hyperbolic transitive dynamics. Okay, so I have these all these properties of approximate continuity of the entropy, that the function, the topological pressure of beta phi as a function of beta is real analytic and strictly convex. Okay, and uniqueness of the linear equilibrium state for each beta phi. Okay, and what is and essentially the proof will be a reduction to the linear case. Okay, and in the end, we will see that nonlinear equilibrium states are equilibrium states for slightly different potentials. So how do we do?
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
Sorry, before you start the proof? So in this theorem, you assume that you have unique equilibrium states, and you prove that there is finiteness, and you relate these nonlinear to the linear case.
Yes.
Is it stupid to think of the other way because it's harder? Like maybe you don't know about the equilibrium states, and for some kind of F, it would be easier to understand the nonlinear case and have some results from this?
I don't know. No? I never thought about that. So it's yeah, it's a question. I don't know, but yeah, it's a question.
Okay.
So yeah, it's possible. I don't know, but the way we thought about it is really going into this direction.
All right.
So I'm not able to answer your question.
No problem.
But
Thank
yeah,
you.
but yeah, that's a good question. Anyway, in fact, one of the goals of my talk is to obtain questions. Okay, so the idea of this reduction from the nonlinear problem to the linear problem is very natural. It's to essentially fix condition the value of the integral of phi. Okay, instead of considering all the, essentially you are bothered by this term f of mu of phi, and to keep it from bothering you, okay, you just, instead of looking at all the invariant measures at once, you just fix the value of mu of phi. So therefore you fix the value of f of mu of phi, and you can work with the usual tools. So let's do it more precisely. So you look at all the values that the integral of phi can take with respect to invariant probability measure. Okay, this is a connected compact subset of R, so it's an interval like that. Okay, and now these are the way I split the invariant measures according to the value of the integral. Okay, so for each z in the right interval, I get a non-empty compact set. Okay, and I will want to study the maximization my variational problem inside each m of z. Okay, so to do this reduction, I need to understand okay, what is the relation? Okay, the basic fact, what makes the proof work, is that if I look at the linear equilibrium states for beta phi, then actually I am beta allows me to control the value of the integral. Okay, so let me, so I want to know that this control also is good. So let me, maybe I've forgotten a step here, but okay, let's see. So my first claim is that I have this function P over R. Okay, I claim, so its values. Okay, what I'm saying is that first, so I know that by assumption, this function P is real analytic and strictly convex. So its derivative will be real analytic and increasing. Okay, strictly convex means the second derivative is positive. Okay, and now what I'm saying is that the derivative of at some point beta is actually the average of phi for the linear equilibrium state nu beta. Okay, and this relies on convex analysis. Okay, maybe I don't want to go into all the details, but essentially you look at the function minus entropy, and okay, it's not, and then it's convex, and by assumption it is lower semi-continuous. Therefore, you can apply things like the Fenchel-Monroe theorem, and okay, you know that P, the pressure is essentially up to the sign, which I can never remember, the convex conjugate of the entropy. Okay, and since the entropy or minus the entropy is a good function, I mean convex and lower semi-continuous, you can essentially go the other way. Okay, and obtain and get this formula for the entropy. And the entropy is this inf over the potentials, okay, like this. And from this, you have a simple computation. All this is classical. It's in Ruel's book. That will tell you that okay, the subdifferential, okay, P is a convex function, so it's not necessarily differentiable, but it has subdifferentials at every point. Okay, and these subdifferentials, they are unique exactly at the point where PT is, where the pressure is differentiable. Differentiable in each direction, Gateau differentiable. Okay, and now once you know this variational, this kind of inverse variational principle for the entropy, you can check that the subdifferential of the pressure at some potential is exactly the set of linear equilibrium state at the same potential. This is, as I was saying, classical. It's in Ruel's book, for instance. Okay, and now once you do that and you look at what are the definition, you get this last equality that tells you that the derivative, the value of P prime at beta is the integral of phi with respect to the linear equilibrium state for beta phi. Okay, and now that you have this, you need to do an extra 2 minutes that I don't have to see that actually these values, they range exactly over the open interval AB. Okay, it's a direct elementary assumption that you can compute, estimate that will tell you that you can essentially, equilibrium state will give you almost all the possible values that would give, that the invariant probability measure would give you, except for the endpoints, okay, that you cannot get. Okay, so that's the first step. Let's, okay, so now it's convenient for the rest to define beta, the function beta, as the inverse of this p prime, just because this notation would be a little bit terrifying for me, at least. Okay, now what you can remark is that nu of beta z, so this is the linear equilibrium state for beta z phi, so it will have the value of as value of the integral of the phi exactly z. This will be the maximizer inside. Now, if I look at all the measures that have the same value for the integral, okay, by construction, this has the value z for the integral. But now you see that in this set, since the value of the integral is fixed, it's just to maximize the entropy is the same as to maximize the classical pressure, and it is the same as maximizing the nonlinear pressure, since the term I'm adding to the entropy is constant over this set. Okay, so inside each such set M of z, the only candidate to be a nonlinear equilibrium state is the linear equilibrium state here. Okay, just by this very simple argument. Okay, now, okay, maybe I don't want to explain. Now I need to study the function h of z, that is what is the maximum value of the entropy over mz as z ranges over the interval AB. I need to find, so the second point told me what is the nonlinear equilibrium state at fixed at given value of the integral. And now I'm going to look for which is the value of z, or what are the values of z that can give me nonlinear equilibrium state. So for this, I need to look at this function entropy when the integral is equal to z. Okay, so I claim that it is continuous and concave over the interval. Okay, this follows from the assumptions. Okay, I don't want to go over time too much. Okay, so this is the concavity is simple. Essentially, you write what it means and you use the affinity of the entropy. And once you know that you have the function is bounded concave, upper semi-continuous on a compact interval, sorry, you can see that it is actually continuous on this interval. Okay, and finally, you can, okay, something that is amusing is that this function h, actually, you can compute it. You could think that it's going to be something crazy, but not at all. You can do a simple computation. So you compute P is this function pressure of beta phi. So you compute beta P of beta z, P of beta z. Okay, you know the equilibrium. This is the classical pressure, the linear pressure. So it's the pressure of the equilibrium, and you write what it is, and you get this formula for h of z. Okay, it's a little bit unexpected. So this is why it's going to be, you see, it's going to be real analytic, because it's built from real analytic function over the open interval, of course. And more or less, you can compute the derivative. And here you have another good thing that happens to you, is that the thing that you wouldn't want to have to know about, they disappear. Okay, so what remains is just minus beta z as a derivative. And since this beta z, you know that it goes to minus infinity when you converge to A, and to plus infinity when you converge to B. You get these estimates on the function h of z. You know that at the boundary, it is strictly increasing at the left boundary and decreasing at the right boundary. Okay, so now we are finishing. So we know that, okay, so we know that for each value of z, there is at most one nonlinear state, and we are going to determine the value of z that play a role. It's just this. Okay, you want to h plus f to be maximum. So it's h of z plus f of z. You want it to be maximum. Okay, but now of course, it is contained in the critical set of this function h plus f, which is reanalytic. Okay, or maybe it's in the boundary. Okay, but since this function is analytic in the open interval, then it could only accumulate on the endpoints. But now, because of these facts about h being increasing, h plus f being increasing or decreasing, you know that it cannot have a maximum near A or near B. So there is no accumulation at all, and it is finite. And so here you see the equation that you could solve if you wanted to, in a special case, to know what are the equilibrium states. I mean, you see that you had, if you need to know P, you need to compute this function P. Once you have this function P, okay, computations will lead you to all this, you will know everything. Okay, so and then at the end, we get this, and that's the proof of the theorem. So it's really reduction of to the linear case because the nonlinearity has this form of f of the measure, f of the integral of the potential. Okay, so I'm just going to conclude. So yes, we have generalized the quadratic formalism of Lepléder and Watt-Bled. Okay, we have okay. And as I was saying, it's a very things are in some sense completely explicit. If you know enough about the linear theory so that you can compute this function P, then you can compute in principle everything. You can find this is what happens when physicists studied the Curie-Weiss model. They could draw curves and then find the two equilibrium states. Okay, what was pointed out to us by Benoît Klockner is that actually for the two first results, we could be in some sense much more general. So what we do essentially applies with the same proofs. If we, instead of looking at this f of the integral of the measure with respect to phi, we could just associate to mu, we could just apply a continuous function, continuous in the weak star topology, to mu, and it seems that everything is fine. For the Walsh-Knoll principle and the convergence of Gibbs ensembles, I don't see at all for now, and I don't believe that it would also be the case for the third theorem about uniqueness. Okay, what we would like to do is to have, so essentially the right setting should be between this thing that we know how to do and something a little bit more general, but not, perhaps not that much. One case that would be, for which there is a reason, would be to, which is interesting, would be this, to have a function of several integrals. Because the Ising, there is a generalization of the Ising models, which is called the Potts model, which is essentially you have, instead of having spins that are up and down, you have several possibilities. And the rule is that the atoms of the same kind like to be next to each other. Okay, so if you have only two kinds, it's the same as the Ising model. But if you have more than two kinds, you have something a little bit different. And formally, it is quite different because we don't know, it doesn't seem to reduce to f of a single potential, but you can write it as a very nice function of several integrals. Okay, so what I would like to say is that some people, so some time ago, Gerhard Keller with Bardet and Zweimüller, and then they studied what I call the dynamically mean field models. It is essentially you apply a transfer operator that depends on the measure. So in some sense, this measure is a kind of described, you can think about it as describing a repartition of particles. And now what happens to the particles depends both on the position of that particle and the average. So it's really, in spirit, it's really mean field in the sense that you don't interact with other particles except through the average of all particles. Okay, there are recent papers by Fanny Saleh, for instance, but okay, they studied the dynamics. So I don't know, but it should, well, it would be interesting to have a connection, maybe in some simplified setup. Okay, and the big question is, okay, can we have dynamical applications? Okay, like I said, the classical linear for thermodynamical formalism allowed the people to study SRB measures. Okay, do we have something like this here? And for now, we don't have. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jérôme. Any comments or questions?
Maybe I have one.
Yes.
Please.
Jérôme, well, can you comment a little bit on the challenges of going beyond the upper semi-continuity of entropy? Because this is used in many steps. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be quite a challenge. So as usual, you have the two parts essentially. The first two theorems, we don't need it.
Yeah.
For the third theorem, really, we need so much that I'm not completely sure what we could do. I mean, especially, well, you see, we rely on, in some sense, this is an exercise in a functional and convex analysis to reduce the nonlinear case to the linear case. If we don't have the upper semi-continuity, then we lose the direct fact that subdifferentials are equilibrium states.
Yes.
So it looks bad. Maybe there is a way to get what we need directly by working seriously. I mean, for now, we don't have to work in some sense. Okay. Once we found the right approach, okay, you just need to, it's a little bit miraculous for me. I mean, I wasn't too much into convex function theory before, but it's really, but actually that's, I mean, it's my fault because in Ruel's book, for instance, it's very clearly explained in that way. Well, you have to survive the first chapters, but I don't know, once you get to chapter 7 or something like this, there is a very nice abstract presentation of the formalism from the point of view of convex theory. And so if you don't have the upper semi-continuity of the entropy, I don't know, you need, I don't know if you can fix the problem of identifying the subdifferential with some kind of equilibrium state. Okay, can you do it by working a little bit more if you have some other properties, dynamical properties, or are you completely stopped by that? I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. More comments or questions?
Sharon?
Yes.
The choice of the nonlinearity that you picked NF of 1 over n clearly comes from that you put there the Birkhoff averages inside as an argument. Did you try other type of nonlinearities?
Not really. I mean, this is, the idea was that we wanted, at least in the good cases, like expensive case, to have the convergence of the Gibbs ensembles. I mean, the measures on finite systems. And for this, so I don't remember precisely, but it was when trying to get this, you see that if you take longer, bigger and bigger finite subsystems, if you don't divide by n inside the function, then you will be looking at, even if you just copy twice the things, you will, the sum will be in a completely different region for f. So it seemed to us very unlikely that you could get a convergence. Essentially, we wanted to say, but okay, we are dynamicists with habits of dynamicists. So we wanted to have something like, okay, for very big subsystems, these sums are converging, or at least the average are converging. So this is what we want to be looking at. And it's also what appears if you try to do it, or if you just copy what physicists did for the Curie-Weiss model, or what Renaud and Frédéric did specifically for this case. Yeah, this is what I can say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Just a very quick question. Do you have examples of infinitely many equilibrium measures when you take some differentiable nonlinearity?
Exactly. Good questions, especially since I know the answer. Yeah, if you only, okay, we can play this game. You give me an arbitrary compact subset of this open interval AB, and then I can make up a C-infinity function big F, such that the non-equilibrium state will be the new beta for beta belonging to your compact set.
Subset, yes.
So really, this is,
so
if you don't have the real analyticity, essentially you keep everything until this point. Okay, so you know that you are looking at the maximum of this function h plus f. Okay, if f is very bad, okay, h essentially you can then you can have lots of maxima. This is just here. You know that h is real analytic, so there's no, it's smooth. So you can essentially flatten this with a C-infinity function, or even better than C-infinity function. It's just that you have to stop before you reach the boundary points, the endpoint, because at this point h is blowing up, and this you don't have to do because the assumption is that f is smooth on R. It should be smooth on something like neighborhood of the interval AB. That would be the same.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
So if we don't have any other comments or questions, we thanks again, and thank you very much, Jérôme.
Thank you.